So I'm Miranda. I'm from the Open Data Institute, and I'm going to be talking about open data, but also data ethics and the work that we've been doing. So this is the Open Data Institute's data spectrum, where we actually think about data as being both open, closed, and shared. And obviously understanding this landscape from an ethical perspective is really important. This is our theory of change, which builds up over time, and hopefully will show where ethics plays into the wider data landscape. But essentially, you can use data to make better decisions, and that is what creates positive social and economic impact. This is what we think. But there's a couple of potential scenarios on each side that we want to avoid in order to create the best value from data. So one is data fearing, when people are afraid and scared of what people and organizations are going to do with their data. And in order to counterbalance that, we need to build trust. And as you can see on the bottom left there, ethics is an incredibly important part of that, but so is equity and engagement. The other scenario that we see developing is around data hoarding, where data is seen as something that has intrinsic commercial value and therefore is restricted when it's in its access. And therefore we need to build a culture of openness through things like innovation, building skills and capability, and actual technical infrastructure. So you could see this as a pendulum that swings in lots of different contexts. In order to try and get this positive impact, we need to think about all these moving parts. But this talk, we're going to focus specifically on data ethics because it's an incredibly important and prescient topic. And of course, this conference about anthropology and technology, data runs underneath all emerging technologies, essentially. This is my quite pixelated trolley problem slide. It's obligatory if we're going to talk about data ethics, but really I won't talk you through the old thought experiment, which is very traditional. Really, this slide is to indicate the fact that these problems are going from thought experiments to actual applied problems that are tangible and relevant to our lives. And this is how we're experiencing this at the moment, through a general sense of distrust. You can see this kind of cultural imaginary here with the Facebook, these guys in faceless suits. We have, on the one hand, very tangible risks, but also amorphous, intangible issues. So this is Donna Haraway. She's a very famous anthropologist who said technology is not neutral. It matters what connections get made and unmade. And of course, whilst that's very relevant to technology, it's even more relevant for data. These problems are not new, but they are becoming far more relevant to our individual lives and tangible. But when we think about data ethics and ethical frameworks, again, this isn't a new thing. This is the Hippocratic Oath. Thinking about ethical frameworks is something that we actually have a huge amount of examples of when we look at different sectors and throughout history. So at the ODI, we have made a definition of data ethics to try and grasp that a little bit more, which is that it is a branch of data ethics that evaluates data practices with the potential to adversely impact on people and society in collection, sharing, and use of data. So we're focusing that definition on the negative impacts of data use, but also there are positive impacts. So this is things like publishing data on the gender pay gap. Data, it can be available as a social good. So there are positive and negative dynamics that need to be understood here that are complex. Also, privacy is a human right. And we also have laws like GDPR, which are a very important part of this wider data ethics landscape. However, just because it is legal doesn't make it ethical. And that grey area is the area that we are thinking about often when we talk about data ethics. When we talk about data ethics, we often talk about personal data, but actually personal data isn't necessarily just the data that has your name attached to it. Your shopping data, your groceries data, which may seem, neutral, isn't neutral at all once you start analyzing it in relationship to other data, such as your geospatial data. Also, data isn't necessarily just about one person. We think about it as our data and a specific relationship, a one-to-one relationship. But often data is about multiple people. If you think about your social media data, for example, that's a very good example, but also your utilities data if you live in a shared household. How do you understand that? So this is a screenshot of a whole load of data ethics principles or AI principles. This is what we're churning out at the moment, people thinking about those kind of broader frameworks. And there is a lot of use for that. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on there. There's also a lot of overlap. But when it comes to actually trying to apply this, it's very difficult. They're not that useful in making better decisions when it comes to the collection, sharing, and use of data. So we've been creating tools like this. This is the most recent version of the ODI's Data Ethics Canvas, which is essentially, it's not rocket science, it's a very simple workshop where the idea is that whoa, terrifying slide, you are not a Debbie Downer. That is what this character is. You can bring a solution. Instead of having this wide, esoteric, abstract problem of data ethics, you can bring this simple, collaborative tool that helps you ask questions and answer them. But one of the things that it also does is it shows you what you do and don't know. Often when people are using things like the Data Ethics Canvas, they don't have all the answers to these questions, but it helps people understand that there are gaps in their knowledge and start thinking about how they might mitigate them. One of the really important things, which will be indicated by the next slide, is that it also hopefully gives them a bit of perspective, starting to understand where the really big, close, tangible issues might be, and where the further away abstract issues might be, and how you communicate about those. But one of the most important things that practical tools like the Data Ethics Canvas can do is it can create a shared language. Oh, that went really well, that transition. It can create a shared language between those two, that group of people who are handling that data. The language of compliance and the language of service design is very different. So having that cultural, that culture of openness and that culture of ethical thinking that can be brought together in a practical way can be very useful. And that is the end of my talk.